Nearly 1 year after that infamous Oscars slap, Chris Rock was on stage in Baltimore delivering his long-awaited response.
He stands alone backstage, sweat still glistening under the lights, the roar of laughter fading into the empty air. The audience is gone now. Just the echo of applause remains, a sound that once felt like salvation, now just noise bouncing off walls that have heard every version of him. Chris Rock, 60 years old, one of the most celebrated comedians alive, wipes his face with a towel, looks into the mirror, and doesn't smile. For the first time in years, the reflection looking back feels unfamiliar. The eyes are tired. The grin looks rehearsed. The world knows him as the man who can make pain funny. But what happens when the pain stops being funny at all? Chris Rock's tragedy isn't about scandal or the slap or even fame. It's about what laughter cost him, what it covered up, and what it could never heal. Behind the rhythm of jokes, behind the quick wit and cutting social truth, there's a boy who learned too early that silence was dangerous and that humor was armor. He grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in the 1970s, a world that didn't welcome him kindly. His neighborhood was rough, his school was rougher. He was bused to a predominantly white school where the lessons didn't come from books, but from survival. Every day was a gauntlet of slurs, punches, humiliation. There were days he'd come home bleeding, his backpack ripped apart. He once said that every day at school felt like walking into a prison yard. Those wounds never really left. The laughter he would later wield on stage began there, as a defense mechanism, a way to take control of the narrative. If he could make them laugh first, maybe they wouldn't hurt him. His parents were his anchor. His mother, Rose, a teacher of special needs children, carried herself with unbreakable grace. His father, Julius, worked multiple jobs: truck driver, newspaper delivery, dishwasher, the kind of man who never complained, who kept his pain to himself. When Julius died young, Chris was just a teenager. That loss burned through him quietly. He buried himself in comedy clubs, sneaking into sets, studying the rhythm of laughter like it was a science. Every night, he'd watch legends perform, absorbing how timing could be truth and how pain could become art. By his early 20s, he was on Saturday Night Live, surrounded by other young dreamers. The world saw him as loud, fearless, unfiltered. Inside, he was nervous, uncertain, desperate to be liked. He wasn't a natural star. He was a student of pain, transforming it into rhythm and punchlines. When he released Bring the Pain in 1996, the world called him genius. His bit on race, relationships, and hypocrisy sliced through American culture like a blade. He was crowned the new Richard Pryor, bold, brilliant, raw. But what no one saw was the exhaustion, the isolation, the pressure to always be the sharpest voice in the room. Every laugh was a high, and every quiet night after the show was a crash. Fame magnified his loneliness. He became the man who understood everyone else's pain, but couldn't express his own. Interviews turned into performances, smiles became reflexes. He built walls around himself so high that even love struggled to climb over. When he met Malek Compton, he thought he'd found something grounding, a woman of strength, intelligence, and kindness. They married in 1996, the same year he ascended to superstardom. They had 2 daughters, Lola and Zara, and from the outside they looked like perfection, the Hollywood power couple. But behind closed doors, fame crept into every conversation. He was gone for months, touring, chasing applause, missing moments that would never come again. By his own admission, he was unfaithful. In interviews years later, he confessed it with the same blunt honesty that defined his comedy. "I was a piece of shit." He admitted he thought he could get away with it because he was famous. He thought the rules didn't apply. But guilt has a way of echoing louder than laughter. His marriage began to fracture. Malek filed for divorce in 2014 after nearly 2 decades together. It was public, painful, and humiliating. For Chris, it wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the collapse of the one place he thought he could be safe. In therapy, he began to confront his demons. He discovered he had a nonverbal learning disorder, meaning he struggled to understand social cues and emotional signals that others take for granted. It explained years of miscommunication, failed relationships, and the emotional distance that haunted him. He started talking about it publicly, not as a punchline, but as confession. But even then, his honesty came wrapped in humor. It was how he'd survived for decades. Then came the night that changed everything. March 27, 2022. The Oscars. The moment is burned into global memory, not because of who won or who lost, but because of what happened in a split second on live television. Chris, presenting an award, made a joke about Jada Pinkett Smith. Seconds later, Will Smith walked up, slapped him across the face, and shouted from his seat. The theater fell silent. Millions watching around the world didn't know if it was real. Chris stood there, frozen, still trying to process what had happened. He smiled. He said, "Will Smith just smacked the shit out of me." The crowd laughed nervously. He kept the show going. But inside, something broke. That slap wasn't just physical. It reopened every wound from childhood, every humiliation he'd buried under humor. He was the bullied kid again, standing alone in front of a crowd pretending everything was fine. That restraint, the decision not to fight back, became both his strength and his curse. The internet made jokes, memes, debates. But Chris disappeared. For months, he said nothing, not a single word. Behind the scenes, he struggled with nightmares, therapy, and emotional paralysis. When he finally spoke about it, it wasn't in an interview. It was on stage, a year later, in his Netflix special Selective Outrage. It was his way of taking back power, through laughter once again. But this time, the jokes carried weight. He admitted the slap hurt, like hell. He said, "I'm not a victim, baby. I took that hit like Pacquiao." The crowd roared, but beneath the humor was exhaustion. The voice of a man who'd been tired for decades. At 60, Chris Rock began to understand something that had eluded him all his life. The difference between being admired and being loved. He could fill arenas, but his house was quiet. His daughters were grown, his marriage gone, and fame, once his greatest escape, had become his loneliest companion. He started spending more time alone, reading, traveling, reflecting. Friends say he's softer now, slower to speak, more observant. He's dated, but cautiously. In interviews, he's admitted he doesn't want to get hurt again. He's admitted therapy is still a weekly ritual, that he's learning how to listen, how to forgive, how to live without needing the world's applause. In recent years, he's found a strange peace in that pain. He talks openly about his mistakes, about fatherhood, about aging. He jokes about getting old, about therapy, about his fear of being irrelevant. But the laughter is gentler now, less weapon, more wisdom. Behind all the success, the wealth, and the accolades, there's still that boy from Brooklyn, the one who learned that people who laugh at you can also hurt you, and that sometimes surviving means pretending it doesn't. That survival became art, that art became fame, and that fame became a mask he spent decades trying to remove. At 60, the tragedy of Chris Rock isn't just what happened to him, it's what he sacrificed for us. Every joke, every special, every punchline came from somewhere deep and dark. He turned his wounds into mirrors, showing America its own pain. But in doing so, he sometimes forgot to heal his own. And yet, there's something quietly redemptive about his story. In the stillness of middle age, after all the noise, he's beginning to find meaning in silence again. He's mending his relationship with his mother, cherishing his daughters, forgiving himself for being human. In a recent conversation, he said, "You spend your life thinking you need to be strong, but strength isn't pretending you're not hurt. It's letting yourself be those words." Simple, understated, may be his truest punchline. Because for Chris Rock, laughter was always a survival instinct. But now, maybe for the first time, he's learning how to live without it. He walks off stage into the night, hoodie up, phone off, breathing in the quiet. The applause behind him fades completely now, and for once, that silence doesn't scare him. Somewhere deep inside, the boy from Brooklyn finally rests. He walks down the narrow hallway toward the exit, the glow of the stage lights behind him slowly fading to darkness. The smell of sweat, makeup, and electricity still lingers in the air. Every show ends the same way. Cheers, lights, then silence. That silence has become his truest companion. For most of his life, Chris Rock ran from it. He filled every quiet moment with noise, with work, with jokes, with movement. Now at 60, he lets it follow him. Maybe for the first time, he's not afraid of hearing himself think. Outside the theater, a small group of fans waits, shouting his name, holding up phones. He waves, smiles, but doesn't stop. The driver opens the car door, and Chris slips inside. The city outside rushes by, the neon blur of Los Angeles, but he barely sees it. He leans back, staring out the window, wondering when laughter started to feel like work. He thinks about his father again, Julius Rock, the man who never got the chance to grow old, the man who taught him how to survive but not how to rest. Chris remembers the day of the funeral, how small the world felt. He was just a teenager, standing beside a coffin, trying to understand how someone so strong could just stop being there. Maybe that's why he worked so hard, to make sure he never disappeared like that. Every show, every special, every headline, it was proof he existed. But fame has a cruel way of convincing you that attention is love. For years, he mistook the two. He'd walk on stage and feel invincible, but when he came home, he'd find himself scrolling through silence. He once said, "People think fame changes you, but it just exposes who you already are." For him, it exposed how lonely he'd always been. He tries to be a good father now. His daughters are grown, independent, brilliant. They tease him, they roll their eyes, but they love him. Still, he worries about how his mistakes shaped them, about what they saw when their parents fell apart in the headlines. Divorce was a public affair, and he knows they carried some of that weight. He once said that if he could go back and do one thing differently, he'd stay home more. "I missed birthdays. I missed just being there," he said. "I thought providing was enough, but love needs time." It's a truth that came late to him. The price of success is often time. Time with family, time to heal, time to breathe. And for decades, Chris paid that price without realizing what he was losing. In his 60s, something shifted. The anger that once fueled his comedy softened into reflection. His jokes still cut deep, but now they carry a tenderness beneath the punch. When he talks about race, about men and women, about hypocrisy, there's a note of sadness. The sound of a man who's seen too much to be surprised anymore. He still believes in laughter, but he no longer hides behind it. The slap, that infamous night, still lingers in every conversation about him. He's tired of it, yet it follows him everywhere. He said once that the world froze him in that moment, like time stopped at the point of contact. People saw the slap, but they didn't see the years before it. The years of restraint, of trying to be the composed one, the man who never lashes out. The slap was public, but humiliation had always been private for him. That night just made it visible. And yet, he forgave. Maybe not easily, maybe not completely, but he moved on. He didn't retaliate, didn't demand an apology that could never undo what happened. He turned the moment into art, his Netflix special, his stage therapy, not for revenge, but for release. Because when you've spent your whole life being the funny one, sometimes the only way to heal is through humor. But even that night, he admitted something most people missed. You never know what someone's going through. It wasn't just about Will, it was about himself. Chris Rock has lived through every version of fame. He's been broke, he's been rich, he's been beloved, he's been mocked, he's been the underdog and the legend. And through it all, the thing that haunted him most wasn't failure. It was never feeling understood. His comedy is intellectual, sharp, layered with social critique, but emotionally, he's always been an island. The nonverbal learning disorder diagnosis explained so much of that. "I just don't pick up on things," he said once. "I don't know when someone's mad or when they're hurt unless they tell me straight up." Imagine living 60 years in a world that constantly misreads you, and you misread it back. That's a kind of quiet tragedy few can see. He talks about therapy now like a religion. Every week, no matter what, he says. It's where he learned to forgive himself for his past. The infidelities, the ego, the emotional distance. It's also where he learned that being funny doesn't make you free. Comedy's a drug, he admitted. You get addicted to the control. You control when people laugh, how they feel. It's intoxicating, but it's also isolating. When the lights go out, there's nothing left to control, just you and silence. There are moments now when he lets that silence hold him. No camera, no stage, no crowd, just stillness. He's learning how to exist without performance. Sometimes he goes for walks in New Jersey where he lives part-time and nobody notices him. He likes that. He says it feels like breathing again. In interviews, he still slips into humor as reflex. It's his natural language. But there's a gentler undertone, an acceptance that wasn't there before. He admits he's scared of dying alone, but no longer terrified of being alone. There's a difference. The first is fear. The second is peace. He's also started reconnecting with old friends, comedians he once competed with, people he used to keep at a distance. There's no rivalry anymore. No need to prove anything. We're all survivors, he said once. Comedy's a war, and if you make it to 60 still telling jokes, you've already won. The tragedy of Chris Rock isn't that his life fell apart. It's that for so long, it looked perfect while he was falling apart inside. The world saw success, brilliance, laughter, but behind it was a man who never really felt like he belonged anywhere. Fame didn't change that. Money didn't fix it. Time didn't erase it. But maybe wisdom can soften it. In private moments, he writes, not jokes, just thoughts. Letters to himself, to his daughters, even to his younger self. He says he wishes he could tell that kid from Brooklyn, you don't have to be funny to be loved. He wishes someone had told him that before he built his whole life around earning applause. He's also more vocal now about mental health, especially for men. We're taught to be tough, he says, but nobody teaches us how to be broken. He talks about crying in therapy, about realizing how much anger he'd buried. I thought being angry made me strong, he said. Turns out it just made me tired. He doesn't perform as often these days. When he does, it's not for validation, it's for connection. The shows are smaller, more intimate. He tells stories now, not just jokes, about growing old, about raising daughters, about learning humility. There's a sense of reconciliation in his voice, with himself, with the past, with life. And yet, sometimes late at night, the ghosts return. The school bullies, the father he never got to impress, the wife he lost, the slap that will never fully fade. They hover, reminding him of everything he's endured. But he doesn't run anymore. He lets them sit beside him. He once said something that could serve as his epitaph. Every laugh I ever got was me saying, I'm still here. That's the essence of Chris Rock, a survivor's humor. A laughter born not from joy, but from endurance. At 60, he knows time is finite. He started talking about legacy, but not in terms of awards or fame. He wonders what his daughters will say about him when he's gone. Whether they'll remember the fame or the quiet talks, the laughter or the lessons. He hopes it's the latter. He says, I just want them to know I tried. I didn't always get it right, but I tried. In a strange way, the slap, the divorce, the heartbreak, all of it gave him clarity. It stripped away the illusion that he could control how people see him. It reminded him that being human is messier than any performance. And maybe that's the most tragic and beautiful part of his story. That the man who spent his life mastering control finally found peace in letting go. He doesn't chase attention anymore. He doesn't crave applause. He jokes that at 60, all he wants is quiet and good Wi-Fi. But there's something deeper beneath that joke. A man who has finally learned to rest. The lights dim in his dressing room. The mirror in front of him reflects an older face, lined with experience but still sharp, still searching. He stares for a moment, then smiles softly. Not the rehearsed grin of the performer, but the tired, real smile of a man who's made peace with imperfection. Outside, the night hums with distant noise, cars, laughter, the endless rhythm of life. Inside, Chris Rock sits alone, content in the silence that once terrified him. He knows the world will always remember the jokes, the specials, the controversies. But he hopes they remember the man too. The kid from Brooklyn who turned pain into poetry, who made millions laugh while quietly trying to learn how to love himself. Because that's the real story. Not the fame, not the slap, not the downfall, but the redemption that comes from understanding your own fragility. At 60, Chris Rock is still standing, still laughing, but softer now, still healing, but no longer hiding. The tragedy of Chris Rock isn't that he fell, it's that for so long nobody knew how much it hurt to stand. He walks out into the night, alone but not lonely. The world has moved on, but he doesn't need it to remember. The air is cool, the sky wide. Somewhere far away, laughter rises from a bar, echoing faintly. He listens, smiles, and whispers to himself, that's enough. And maybe for the first time in his life, it truly is. He watched legends perform in smoky clubs. Richard Pryor, George Carlin, Eddie Murphy. He'd stand in the back, too shy to laugh, just listening, studying rhythm, observing how pain could be reshaped into something that made people exhale. Those rooms smelled of cigarettes and survival. They were his church, his classroom, his escape. He learned that on stage, honesty was power. You could say the unsayable, confess what people were afraid to admit, and somehow they'd thank you for it. He didn't realize it yet, but every time he grabbed the microphone, he was slowly turning pain into purpose. When he first stepped onto a stage in Manhattan, his hands trembled so badly he almost dropped the mic. The lights blinded him. His first joke landed awkwardly, but the second one hit, then the third. And the laughter came like a wave. For the first time, he felt seen. Not as a victim, not as a target, but as a voice. That sound, laughter, became his proof of existence. In it, he found what he thought was love. He would spend decades chasing it, thinking applause was affection. Fame didn't happen overnight. He grinded through brutal years, low-paying gigs, hecklers, long nights on buses. But he kept going, because for him, the stage was the only place that made sense. When Saturday Night Live called in the early 1990s, it was validation. He had arrived, or at least, that's what he thought. Yet behind the scenes, he struggled. He wasn't always given the best material. He felt sidelined, underestimated. The very dream that was supposed to save him almost broke him. So he left. That decision, scary as it was, changed everything. He started from scratch, reinvented himself, went darker, bolder. By the time he released Bring the Pain in 1996, the world finally understood who Chris Rock was. His comedy wasn't just funny. It was searing truth wrapped in rhythm. His jokes about race, relationships, politics, they weren't punchlines. They were mirrors. America laughed because it saw itself, raw and uncomfortable, in his words. He became a phenomenon, a voice of a generation. Every special was sharper than the last, bigger and blacker, never scared, kill the messenger. His timing was surgical, his insights fearless. But behind the roar of stadiums, there was a silence no one could hear. Fame had made him untouchable, but also unreachable. The more people loved him, the more isolated he became. Friends became colleagues, home became a hotel room, and laughter, the very thing that once saved him, began to feel hollow. Then came love, or what he thought was love. When he met Malak Compton, he finally felt grounded. She was strong, educated, compassionate. For the first time, he could imagine stability. They built a family, had 2 daughters, created a life that seemed complete. He'd walk red carpets, make jokes about married life, and people would laugh, never knowing that behind the punchlines were cracks already forming. The truth, as he later admitted, was that he didn't know how to be still. He didn't know how to be vulnerable. He'd been performing his entire life, even in love. Fame had fed his ego, and ego poisoned what mattered most. He cheated, repeatedly. He justified it with the same logic that destroys so many stars. I thought I could get away with it. But guilt doesn't disappear with fame. It festers. When his marriage ended in 2014, he called it the lowest point of his life. The headlines focused on scandal, but the real story was about a man realizing too late that laughter couldn't fix loneliness. In interviews years later, he didn't hide from it. He owned it. "I was a piece of shit," he said bluntly. "I lost my family because of my ego." That honesty, raw and self-inflicted, became his new kind of courage. Therapy became his stage now. For the first time, he wasn't performing for an audience. He was performing for himself. He began to uncover things buried since childhood. Pain he never processed, anger he mistook for confidence. Then came the diagnosis that reframed his life. Nonverbal learning disorder. It explained decades of confusion. He struggled to read social cues, missed emotional signals, often misunderstood people's intentions. It was like realizing you'd been speaking a different language your whole life. For someone who made a living off reading the world, it was a humbling discovery. It forced him to slow down, to learn empathy not through instinct, but through intention. And then, when he was finally finding peace, the world saw him at his most humiliated. The night of the Oscars, 2022. The slap. The moment no one could escape. Millions watched as Will Smith struck him across the face. The sound echoed through the Dolby Theater, but the silence after was even louder. Chris didn't hit back. He didn't scream. He stood there, holding his dignity like a fragile thing. "Will Smith just smacked the shit out of me," he said, and somehow kept the show going. That restraint, the calm, the composure, was a lifetime of control in 1 second. But that night reopened wounds older than his fame. It wasn't just about a slap. It was about being humiliated again, in front of the world. For months, he said nothing. People begged for interviews, reactions, revenge, but he stayed silent. He was processing not for the cameras, for his soul. When he finally did speak, it was on his own terms, through selective outrage. The jokes were sharp, but behind them, you could hear the ache. He said it hurt like hell. He said, "I'm not a victim," but you could tell. The wound ran deep. That night changed something in him. It stripped away any illusion he had left about control. It reminded him that no matter how far you go, pain will always find its way back to you. But it also reminded him of something else, his strength. He didn't crumble. He didn't lash out. He turned it into art. That's what survivors do. In the years since, Chris has become quieter. His shows are smaller, more personal. His jokes are slower, heavier with reflection. He doesn't need to shout anymore. The world listens to whispers now. He talks about therapy, about love, about growing old. He jokes that aging is just your body slowly firing you. But underneath the laughter is peace, the kind that comes from surrender. He's dating again, but cautiously. He spends time with his daughters, with old friends. He's learning how to be present. He says he finally understands what his father never had time to teach him. That strength isn't silence, it's softness. Sometimes he visits his old neighborhood in Brooklyn. He stands outside the school where he was bullied, the bus stop where he used to cry quietly before walking home. He says it's strange. The ghosts are still there, but they don't scare him anymore. "I used to think those years broke me," he said once. "Now I realize they built me." At 60, he's aware of mortality. He jokes about it on stage, but privately, he's introspective. He talks about legacy, not in terms of fame or money, but impact. "If my daughters remember me as a good dad, that's enough," he said softly in one interview. "Everything else is noise." The tragedy of Chris Rock isn't a single moment. It's the accumulation of a lifetime spent making the world laugh while quietly aching inside. It's the loneliness of a man surrounded by people. It's the silence that follows applause. But tragedy doesn't mean defeat. For him, it's been transformation. He's turned pain into perspective, ego into empathy, laughter into truth. There's a scene that could end his story perfectly. He's standing outside after a late-night show. The theater lights dim behind him. The city hums around him. A few fans call his name, but he waves them off gently. He looks up at the sky, quiet, endless. No cameras, no noise, no laughter. Just the sound of wind and the faint pulse of his own heartbeat. For a long time, he stands there, breathing. This is the part no one sees. The peace that comes not from victory, but from survival. The man who once believed that being funny was the only way to be loved has finally learned that being human is enough. At 60, Chris Rock doesn't need the world to laugh anymore. He just needs it to listen. Sometimes he thinks about all the people who never got the chance to grow old, the ones who burned out before they ever found peace. He knows how easily it could have been him. A wrong turn, one more bad night, one moment of anger caught on camera. That's all it takes. He's seen it happen to friends, idols, peers. The industry loves a comeback, but it loves a collapse even more. And somehow, through every storm, every scandal, every slap, he's still standing. He's not angry anymore. That's the part people wouldn't expect. Anger was once his engine, the fire that fueled his jokes, his rhythm, his truth. But now, when he walks off stage, he doesn't feel the rush to prove anything. He feels gratitude. Gratitude that he still has his voice, that his daughters still call him dad, that his story didn't end in bitterness or silence. In the quiet hours, he writes. Not for a show, not for a special, just for himself. He scribbles thoughts about forgiveness, about fear, about how sometimes the funniest thing about life is how serious it gets when you finally start to understand it. He used to think the world was divided into winners and losers. Now he thinks the real goal is to simply endure. When people ask him what keeps him going, he laughs that same soft, weary laugh and says, "Man, I just ain't done yet." And maybe that's the perfect ending. Not redemption, not revenge, not applause, just a man still standing, still learning, still laughing. Because after everything, Chris Rock is proof of something simple and profound. Pain doesn't define you. It refines you, and as the lights fade, he walks off into the dark. No spotlight, no cheers, just silence. But for once, that silence feels like peace. The laughter will come again tomorrow, and maybe the pain will too. But tonight, he's just a man who survived it all. At 60 years old, Chris Rock doesn't need the world's approval. He's already earned something greater. He's found truth. He's found forgiveness. And in that quiet space between tears and laughter, he's finally found himself.